Hey, it's Allison Law, and you're listening to the Literary Atlanta podcast. Before I jump into this week's episode, I want to say congratulations to DeKalb County Public Libraries. The Georgia Public Library Service has named them the Georgia Public Library of the Year for their efforts to grow meaningful engagement and impact with their diverse community. The DeKalb County Public Library System, which is my county public library system, by the way, serves 22 different library locations, and they have this campaign called Read More. The slogan is Read More, Think More, Play More, Make More, Get More, and it highlights the many ways the community can engage with the library and its various resources. The DeKalb County Public Library also is a host for the Georgia Center for the Book. This past Monday, I was there for an event with Atlanta author Sonia Kamal. We were celebrating her new novel, Unmarriageable, which is a retelling, reimagining. We were trying to come up with just the right word to describe it. But it's basically Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice set in Pakistan, which is where Sonia is from. And we had an amazing night there, so they do an incredible job. Congratulations to DeKalb County Public Library System. Well-deserved recognition. And we've got a special crossover episode. You know, Literary Atlanta is not the only books and literary podcast in town. No. There are at least two others. And I had some great conversations with the host of the other two podcasts. So I'm going to play one that we recorded back in August of 2018 with the host of the What Are You Reading podcast. I've got Tim Rhodes and Ian North coming up next. This is episode 53 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Hello, this is Allison Law, and you're listening to the What Are You Reading podcast.
Hey, I'm Tim Rhodes, and this is Literary Atlanta.
What you are listening to today is a podcast about two podcasts about books. We're really thrilled to bring our two podcasts together today to talk a little bit about what we're reading, about why we do what we do, and what we enjoy about the community here in Atlanta. So, Allison, thanks for joining us.
No, I'm so pleased to be here and be surrounded and smelling all of the books and just kind of taking it all in. This is a really cool space.
Well, Allison, why don't you talk to us about Literary Atlanta? How did that get going, and what's it about for you?
Literary Atlanta came about probably in early 2017. I was still talking to some friends of mine, and as a publicist who works with authors and other people in the publishing industry, I'm keenly aware of the fact that the number of media outlets who cover books has really shrunk over time. But I really feel like the fervor and the word of mouth about books is really just growing and growing. So I wanted to create a place where people could talk about books and I could talk to authors about books. And so that was just kind of the basic premise. And then I started working with a production company in early 2017, kind of trying to flesh out the concept. What are we going to call it? What's it going to be about? And because I am the world's reigning overthinker, it took us forever to get to actually, and finally, the producer I was working with at the time was like, we just need to record stuff and put it out there. And so we came up with, it was going to be Literary Atlanta, and it was going to be a little bit of an intro to me and, you know, how I got into books. And then there was going to be an interview with an author. And there are three kind of prerequisites for being on the Literary Atlanta podcast. It has to be someone who either lives here in the metro Atlanta area, who has subject matter ties to Atlanta, or who is visiting here on book tour. And so that's a pretty big open circle of people because we have so many people, so many events. And so that brings us to the end. After the interview, I always do a little bit of a preview of the events that are happening
Yeah.
in Atlanta, because one of the goals of that podcast, of the Literary Atlanta podcast, is to get people to go and see
Yeah.
authors and writers in person.
That's one thing I appreciate of your podcast. I mean, not one of many things, but
Sure.
I love the wrap at the end, the last 3 or 5 minutes, where I think, like you said, the outlets for authors for books is going down, but the events are still just frequent and all the time. And I think even though I love books, I'm in that book world, I just forget. I kind of just assume that there isn't that much. And so hearing about these just numerous, just constant events have been really encouraging, and I've been out to very few.
I was going to ask you. That's my follow-up question. Like, when was the last time you went to a book event?
There was,
Tim?
Unfortunately, not many, but I have been to the Wren's Nest a couple times during. It's more not a book event, more of the storytelling events. They're in February. Back every Saturday was free storytelling. Took the kids, but it's just good to know about, and like I feel like that awareness. I would have never known that before your podcast. I don't know why. Even though I'm in that, I like to think I'm in that book world, but realizing that there's so much more than I think out there. It's been really encouraging.
Yeah. You're also involved in one of the events we've been to and recorded at is the Decatur Book Fest. So.
Right. I have gone to every single Decatur Book Festival, and this is the 13th year since the book festival has been in existence. So, I have even changed Labor Day, because it happens every Labor Day weekend. I've even changed vacation plans because I have to be at the Decatur Book Festival. And then I've had the good fortune of working as a member of the team. And so getting ready, we're about 4 or 5 weeks out from that. It's an incredible production, and they have a great lineup again this year. So now, as part of what I do for Literary Atlanta, I'm starting to talk to the authors who are going to be here for that.
That's awesome.
So,
So 13 years, that's a while. Like, how has it evolved and changed? Because I have to assume, like, right now, it's this, I mean, is it the largest in the country, right? One of the largest independent or nonprofit book festivals.
Yeah.
How has that changed in the 13 years? I mean, I can't imagine it's been this size the whole time. Like, has it just kind of grown every year?
Not at all. I think it was just kind of a brain bubble that the founder, Darren Wong, had after going to another book festival, the South Carolina Book Festival, which is no longer in existence. But so it just kind of became this harebrained idea that turned into this festival where last year I'm pretty sure we had about 80 to 85,000 people in attendance. So definitely it's not it's not what it was 13 years ago. And I think the reason is that Decatur is perfect. It's a very intellectually curious community. The people in government positions, the city of Decatur, all of the business owners and entrepreneurs in Decatur, all of the schools, Agnes Scott College, Emory University is a big sponsor every year, the AJC, of course. So it's kind of just like the perfect microcosm for that type of festival. And I have been to festivals all over the Southeast and in other places, and I've never seen the audience. You know, I would go to one festival, which shall remain nameless, and I was sitting in the audience just as an attendee, and when it got to the time where, you know, there's author Q&A, nobody was talking or asking questions, and the author, you know, it's horribly uncomfortable as an author to be sitting up there and be like, so in Decatur, it's like people are, you know, their butts are on the edge of the seats, like they're ready to ask their questions. So they're just very engaged. And I think that's what I love about live book events, is that it offers that extra layer of understanding. It makes it less of a monologue and more of a dialogue between the writer and the reader.
And I think that's when we started this What Are You Reading thing, like before we started this, Tim and I used to get together and drink beers and talk about books. Like it was always like there was a celebration going on, and I think we like that. It exists here in Atlanta, but we've also wanted to cultivate it, this sense of like it's not something you sit alone and care about, like in isolation, but books can be part of this, can be part of our sense of community and identity. It can be part of our sense of like connecting with the stories of other people. I mean, you spend a lot of time alone if you're a reader, which we love to do that. But
exactly.
But I do love what you're doing and what what happens in Decatur, and also something we're trying to cultivate here, is that sense of like when a reader gets together with another reader, there's such great conversation.
Definitely.
That can happen.
And the two of you connected through your church community first. At what point did you realize that you had the books and kind of the philosophical discussions and the literary discussions in common?
One hangout.
It was pretty quick. I'm trying to remember when, but we kind of, I don't know how I came up, but through our conversation, we actually ended up, we kind of lament, like we hear about like these so it started with as like a book club. So like we'd hear about all these book clubs or, and we were really not jealous, but like, man, I want to do something like that. And we just like kind of looked at each other like, why don't we? And so we started a book club where we'd have people over, and it was a little different. We wouldn't
turn into a huge party.
And it used to, instead of it being everybody reads one book and then talks about it, it was more, we picked an author and you just read from this author, whatever you wanted.
Cool. Yeah.
And came in and shared kind of, you could either read a passage or read a short story or talk.
We do like,
it was very free.
Yeah.
flowing.
For example, we picked Wendell Berry for one time, and then, and then, like, he has short stories, he has novels, he has essays, he has poems. So everyone goes out and reads as much as they can of Wendell Berry. The goal is, like, at the end of the night, to have to be able to feel your way around a certain subject or author, rather than to have everyone read the same piece and answer, like, generic questions about it.
Yes.
We, like, let's go find what we can find and come back and have a party and read it. So we did Borges, too, and, like, other really... It was just a wide range of...
Yeah, and... I'm trying to remember what point it went from that to podcast. I don't remember that exact transition, but there was another part where... Brilliant. Oh, good. Okay. Because I don't remember.
So it's like if you listen to our podcast, it's really focused on. We believe that books provide like a sort of common base for conversation, but we're really focused on like who's doing interesting community work and also who's working in or speaking for like sort of communities who don't get featured in big conversations that are going on in Atlanta. So we both have kids, and I go over. I live in an apartment complex, so Tim's driveway is like my kid's default
hangout area,
hangout area. So I would go over all the time, and we'd sit in his driveway. And one day we had been thinking about doing a podcast and talking about books for a long time. One day he pitched the idea to me of like, what if we just have one called What Are You Reading?
Yeah.
Where we get interesting people and just ask them, hey, what are you reading? And then just let that conversation, since that's what we do anyway.
Yeah. There's like an excuse to talk about books, but just record
and it wouldn't be a one-word answer with a reader either, because it's like, oh, well, hold on, let me pull out my list.
Yeah, exactly. How many do you read at a time? Right?
It's bad, yeah.
Yeah, I said this once before. I think it's so cute that people put on their profiles that CR, like currently reading this one book, because I've got like 12 that are open at a time. And so that would be a really long list for me. So, but I go to different books. I get different things out of different books. Yep. You know, at night I want to shut my brain down. So I really love fiction that will take me out of thinking about the day-to-day stuff and what I have coming up tomorrow. And then there are other times that I'm reading books for like just the craft of writing. This is really great. And how did they do that? And then there's nonfiction and history, and so I kind of go back and forth. And I never used to be that way. I used to be I'm going to start with this book and I'll read it until I'm finished, and then I'll go to the next one. And I can't.
Yeah.
Do that.
I think the only limitation for me on that is I'll read like one kind of like right now I'm reading Lydia Davis's short stories. So I wouldn't read her short stories at the same time that I'd be reading another writer of flash fiction. So I can have like 4 or 6 books going, but they all have to be on kind of different threads because I'll get confused. My brain is so small, it can't handle that.
But it makes for an interesting like mega story. You have, I feel, and definitely when I've been putting together programming for the book festival too, it all becomes like this one big book. 200 different books become this one big book because you just get them all mixed up. But,
I've been doing a study on a certain because I work as a pastor on one of my side jobs, and I've been doing this study on like the relations of the Christian faith to political power throughout history and all the different views on it and why it's evolved the way it has. But I've been reading so many books on that topic that some of the best ideas I have, I can't I don't know if it came from, I don't know like which one it came from.
Yeah.
They're all sort of the same, a big cloud
So
of...
you just kind of mumble, said that. Yeah.
As the great thinkers, I'm so sad.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that the three of us have in common is that we all kind of have these cobbled together jobs and
Yes.
and podcast and different interests. Why do you like doing the What Are You Reading podcast? What is it that you've learned in the past year from doing this?
I like it's kind of, and this is kind of a little bit going back to what Ian said. First of all, books. Love talking about books, and especially if it's people that I respect and looked up to. Like anything they're reading, I'm going to put it on my list. Like and so part of it's that just wanting to hear what they're reading. Part of it's also what they're doing, their particular sphere, like professional work. I might want to learn more about that, write that stuff down. But it's also like what Ian said. I love the idea of bringing people in and learning more, maybe not just about our local community, some of that, but then just Atlanta in general, listening to people that might be on the margins of society, people maybe that are misrepresented in society, and hearing like a clear voice, clear stories from them.
Yeah.
That's been really gratifying to me. I think that's been some of my favorite episodes to talk about, because I feel like there's a lot of generality. We kind of work, I feel like society, we kind of have to work in generality sometimes. It's like just to save time and make things easier, but a lot of times ends up misrepresenting entire groups of people. And so to be able to talk to people who either within those margins or working with those margins, just, I don't know, I've really loved, and just giving them a voice too, and to let them, let people hear what they're doing and how they can even, if someone's maybe interested or not educated on that sphere of influence, I don't know, to learn more, to get involved. I've really loved giving that, like kind of amplifying those voices.
Sure. So, Ian, can you think of an example of that? One of the episodes or one of the guests that you've had that you felt like...
Yeah, I mean, our most recent interview was with Yami Cambron, who's a teacher at Cross Keys High School. And we've admired her work. She's an artist and also a good community organizer.
Mm-hmm. Where's Cross Keys High School?
It's right in this area. It's down off of Buford Highway in sort of the Brookhaven.
Okay.
Right across the Brookhaven line. But the student body is just incredibly diverse in terms of people groups, and the school has this real interesting community. Most of the students we work in my day job, most of the students,
as a youth pastor, yes.
Yeah, most of the students that I work with attend there, and I just love it as a collection of resilient people who are who are forming community and living beautiful lives under pressures that I can't imagine. So we invited Yami to come on, and we got to hear from her some of the books that connected her struggle as an undocumented American with connected her story with other stories like the Holocaust and what had been done to people during that time, and where she felt like there were common threads there, or how her experience related to LGBTQ people who are marginalized in different ways. And so hearing her tell us that story and relate it to books that we had all explored or could explore together was really cool. I think so. For me, that was that interview was like an embodiment of what we're trying to do, which is to say, Tim and I are vastly different from a lot of people we're talking to, and we have our listeners are just very diverse, just from all walks of life and everything. And we hope that amid all that diversity, which is kind of definitive of Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
People can say, hey, there's some stories that even if it's not my story, I can hear these stories and listen to them and relate with them. And we have book lists, that you can read if you want to learn more. I think the idea that people can gather around a story and care about stories that aren't their own, I think is beautiful. So we have no way, and you know this too, in the podcasting world, it's really difficult to know like where it's landing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised when someone I've never met before comes up in tech. I had a woman come up to me at a book event, and she was kind of lingering behind me in the book line and kept getting inching a little closer. And I was like, "Hi, I'm Allison." She was like, "Okay, good. I thought that was you." She was like, "I was listening to your voice to make sure." And it was just, it's a weird phenomenon.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Tim and I have to wear baseball hats and aviator glasses to
Yeah.
airports
we don't
now.
want to get
The Charlie Chaplin, mustache. And, I understand. It is a glamorous life.
Yeah. The fame, really, Allison, if we're being honest. That's what I'm in it
That's
for.
what we're here for. Yeah.
Well, so Allison, you mentioned there are some books. We want to make sure we are talking books. There's some books you read just for the beauty and craft of writing. Let's start there. Are there any books recently that have just seemed like really beautiful or well crafted or interesting that you've read lately?
I had no idea you were going to ask me this question.
Surprise! Allison, what are you reading?
I'm doing a segment for On Second Thought, which is a show in Georgia Public Broadcasting.
Yeah.
They're going to start a regular segment where they bring people in to talk about 4 books, and particularly 4 books about the South or by Southern writers.
That's awesome.
So one of them, when I think about beautiful writing and prose, is Look Away by Wilton Barnhart. He was at the Decatur Book Festival a few years ago, and he gave a reading, and he's this very tall, very commanding gentleman with a beard and mustache, and he gave a reading in the voice of the Southern kind of debutante mother. And in the beginning, we're all kind of like giggling and laughing because this very commanding male figure at a pulpit, by the way, because he was in the Decatur Presbyterian Church, was doing a reading as a woman, and then he had that place shut down because he delivered this big punch. It was this speech where this mother is defending her daughter, and she goes from being the, I'm this, social debutante woman, and we're going to do things the proper way, and then just going for the jugular. And that, it was so still. And that's what his writing does, is it lulls you into this kind of, it's funny and kind of humorous, and let's poke fun at the rich people and of North Carolina society. And then he just goes for the jugular. So it was great. It's a beautifully written book. He teaches at UNC.
Was that recorded by any chance? Like, did anybody capture it?
I don't know if anybody recorded it or not.
Always curious.
but the people at GPB asked me the same thing. They want audio to go with this. But I don't know if there's any. It was fantastic. It was fantastic.
Usually that's the best stuff, is when at the end you're like, oh, we didn't get that. It was in the moment. It was just like this perfection,
Yes, it's just in my memory.
One of those you had to be there thing.
Yeah, you have to. That's why you got to go. I mean, otherwise you would never know.
I was thinking when I was thinking about your podcast, and you can probably come up with better ways of describing it, but I think juicy might be a word I would use to characterize Southern literature, and particularly the literature of the state, or like humid. I don't know.
Sultry.
Apparently moist is an offensive word, so we would never use that. But there's some sense of like weight in the air when you read Southern literature, for me, in my experience. How would you describe the kind of literature that we're contributing from our area?
Ooh. Well, from Atlanta, or from where I grew up, which is Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is totally different. Our outside of here, it would be a completely different experience, different stories to tell.
So as someone we've interviewed a couple authors, but I'm not that knowledgeable about literature that's coming out of Atlanta specifically. Is there like a tone or character to our literature that's coming out of our city?
I think the good thing is that it's not a single monolithic voice like we were just talking about, but it's very diverse, and it's almost like a spectrum now. Where we have these singular voices that are getting elevated and out there. And because Atlanta itself is such a diverse group. I mean, there's so many people who are just transplants from the northeastern region, period. But, and also we gained, 500,000 people when Hurricane Katrina came through. So we have all of these interesting, emigrations that have happened here. So I don't know that there's one singular voice that speaks for the city of Atlanta. But I think it's a lot of different shared experiences. I think we all, and tell me if you agree or disagree, have things that we love and hate about the city.
Oh, yeah.
So,
agree. Strongly agree.
So I think that it's interesting to have those commonalities, and also to be like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I think one of the things, we've talked about this way before, but I think one of the interesting things about literature, like particularly when you're reading about your place or is it's a way to process a complaint that you weren't aware of sometimes. So I may not be aware of the impact of my politics on people from different groups, or I may not be aware of the impact of my faith on people of different groups. In literature, there's a space to confront that and make adjustments before I've hurt, or while I'm hurting, or so that I can repent of hurting. Literature gives us that when you're talking about a particular place. I think I've seen some of that, like even with like, this is outside of book world, but still well in story world. The show Atlanta. Like you think about, that's a great local, like a masterpiece. And I think what you think about when you think about Atlanta has to change if you watch that show.
Yes.
It registers a complaint about the impact of certain ways of relating with different communities in our city. And I think literature and art that's local has that benefit. I have to confess, though, I haven't been as good about exploring local literature. So most of the names
here, actually, I have to admit, I feel bad, but I need to.
We're so ashamed.
Well, good. I'm glad that I could shame you publicly for
we're going to send this confession
pretending
out.
like you are big book lovers, and yet no. I mean, I think the other piece of it is that there are people who aren't from Atlanta who come here regularly. There are 3 or 4 book events just this week featuring authors who are, National Book Award winners. The Carter Center is also very good at having, social activists and politicians and biographers and, so there's just so many different opportunities to kind of learn from people all over the place.
Yeah. I agree. I'm not trying to change this up to go random, but before we get to the rest of your books, I'm always intrigued to ask. So your kind of trajectory, what you've been doing throughout your life, broadcast journalism, English writing, editing. At what point, like as a child or growing up, did you? I don't know if it was something you read or an author or something. Where did you get hit and just say, "This is what I'm going to be doing. This is what I love." Is there like a definitive moment in your life, or was it just kind of like this culmination of just loving reading, or I don't know?
Well, it's kind of two things, I guess. The broadcast journalism side, I can definitely pinpoint because my grandfather, who I was very close to, worked for what used to be part of Turner. It's outdoor advertising, and back in the day, as someone who grew up in 70s, early 80s, he would have his little Casio tape recorder, and he would take me out at night to go check the billboard lights and see which ones needed new bulbs. And so we would pretend like we were doing ABC's Wide World of Sports, and I was Howard Cosell. So I've always been, kind of a ham, and so there's that piece of it, and there's a long story about how that first job started. But then the love of reading is definitely something I can attribute to my mother. My mom always read, and even when I couldn't read, I would get her to read her books aloud to me, or read my books aloud to me. And we still, to this day, read books and pass books back and forth, although she doesn't normally like the stuff I like to read and vice versa. When I started grad school, I told her I was taking a class on Henry James, and she said, well, I'm reading E.L. James. And I was like, Oh God, things you never want to hear mothers say. But it's definitely something that she and I have and I just gave her a book recently and that she read, and she was like, I wasn't sure I was gonna like it, but I read it and it was good. So that's a win.
Yeah, when I give or show my parents books now, like it used to be like, I really hope if they get what's good about this book, they'll get something about me. And now it's more like I'm just like, you probably won't like this, but this is what I'm into now. Yeah. So,
and do they read it?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Well, it's not very often, but I gave like Marilyn Robinson is one of my favorite writers, and I gave my mom a copy of Lila, and usually when they respond to something like that, they'll go, "Oh, that was interesting." So I got some of that.
Yeah. But, and is Lila her fiction or nonfiction?
It's one of her fiction books. So she sort of operates in two worlds with their guiding ideas, but the style is way different. So I love her fiction because she's really like, she calls herself a Christian humanist. So as an essayist, she's sort of a historian and theologian, and also commentator on current issues in light of those two. But her books are really focused on like human dignity and relationships that stress or reveal that are common in her themes. So you see both of those, but it's way different. The writing. But we listened to the audiobook of Gilead, so I'm looking for an entry point into. She had a new essay collection called "What Are We Doing Here?" And I would say there are certain essays in there that profoundly changed my vocabulary about certain things. Like beauty. I would use the word beauty all the time, but I didn't have a real, this is what beauty means. And she said something like, I think part of the definition of beauty is that it both commands and rewards our attention. And I was thinking about that definition, and now when I say a book's beautiful, that's part of what I mean about it, is that there's something that it demands your attention and that it rewards the attention that you give it. So there are
worth your time. That's
awesome.
good.
Yeah, there are things like that in all of her work. But I'm always like, when I don't know if it's like this, we all read a ton of books. When you read books, do you still feel like they change you after being in that world for so long?
Oh, yeah, that's a good. I feel like some either it doesn't and I kind of forget about it, or I can't stop thinking about that book. So I think yes, but it's not. But it's not common, and if it does, I know it immediately.
Can you remember the last time you felt that way when you finish? You're like,
right.
As a matter of fact.
Let me look at 1 second. I promise this will be fast.
No, this is what I have to do too. I have to look at. I keep up with everything on Goodreads now.
Oh yeah, we do too.
And part of it, a friend of mine asked me just the other week, when do you read for pleasure? And I do a lot of reading for work, to prepare for interviews, or because I'm helping to publicize a book, or I'm choosing a book for something. But I never think of it as not pleasurable unless it's a book I don't like.
Yeah.
But at this point too in my life, I have begun to abandon books. I'll give it 100 pages, but then.
Oh wow! I need to start doing that.
I haven't gotten there yet. I can't.
No.
But there's certain books I will. That's what I'm hitting, because I'll read certain books. And I'm like, I just know but I'm like I'm like kind of a completist. I got to barrel through it, I think eventually I need to get to that point where I just cut it off after a while.
Yeah.
But so I do have one.
All right. So on the total opposite of that,
there's quite a few.
Okay.
But the reason I was looking through is I wanted to think of the most recent one, and that would be I finally read. This is a graphic novel, but the Mouse series 1 and 2. It's a book. It's a man who's writing about his father who endured who was in concentration camps in the Holocaust, and it's 2 graphic novels. And just seeing his experience, but then also kind of reflecting on present day and how it's changed him, and the guilt, that kind of survivor's guilt that came because he survived. He watched so many people, so many friends, family die, and to see he lived through it. He was one of the few, and it was just in so many levels. It was a moving story, anyways, because it's about this one man's fight for survival, trying to keep his family together. But then also, they're kind of pairing it's also the first person perspective of the son who's writing it. He's almost writing it in the graphic novel as well. He's talking about working on this book about his father and seeing like that experience of hearing the stories from his father and how his father's life, his father's life, and seeing how it's kind of changed his personality, that guilt, and he's a different person because of that. And I'll leave it at I'm intentionally staying vague because it's beautiful and it's powerful, but that one, it really raw. I mean, it was very beautiful, but it's weird saying that something like that's beautiful, devastating, heartbreaking. But that's a recent
totally
one,
up my alley. I didn't get into graphic novels until I was in school and studied Fun Home by Alison Bechdel.
I read that this past year. Man.
Yeah. And to get super nerdy on you, you can break it down narratologically, and you have the words, like what's presented to you as words in the thought bubbles and as the little captions at the bottom of the comic squares strips. Again, this is not my strength, but then there's what's happening in the pictures, and then the third narratological stream is what the dissonance between the two. So she can be talking about how she and her father or her family are having a great time, and then you see them like totally frowny face and like just tolerating each other. So there are three different things that are happening there. It's just brilliant. I'm so impressed and want to read other graphic novels after that. So
yeah, I just started in the last few years. My first one was Watchmen that I read, but was blown away. And so after that, I was like, I'm still really selective, but yeah, Fun Home, Mouse. There's so many that are it's just a different side of storytelling. I don't know. It's just a different way of getting stories, and it's beautiful.
The continuation of the John Lewis graphic novel series coming out. So they're doing beyond the first three March trilogy. They're going back, and I don't want to misspeak. I can't remember if it's before, like further back into his history, or further, or I think it's a continuation of the story, not a prequel. But he was a big hit at Book Expo in New York. I'd
like to pull it into our podcast for just a second and ask this kind of final question today. Is if someone is a loyal listener to each of our podcasts, what do you hope they would say they gain from listening to it?
Let's meditate on that for a moment.
We have time.
I mean, I can tell you very quickly that the times when I see people at events and they tell me, or they tell the bookseller, or they tell the author that they're here because they heard about it on Literary Atlanta, that's like the best dessert in the world. It's like,
that's awesome.
I'm so glad, or just making the listener feel respected and like they're hanging out with me for a little bit and learning a little bit about an author and their writing that they wouldn't have heard or known about before, or feeling like they have a community of people who are listening and who are interested in the same things. I think that's a big, we all like that word here, community.
That's a key word. I guess for me personally, I as much as I want people, to enjoy, the community, the books and everything, I think one of the things that I love about books is the ability to kind of open your mind to other ideas without you're not making any commitments or declarative statements by reading and exploring ideas. And so that idea of being able to kind of safely explore other perspectives, other cultures, you name it, and to kind of use books to kind of grapple with ideas that maybe you've never thought of before, new topics. I would like to think that maybe even if someone came out at the end not necessarily agreeing with everything, that's totally fine, but just maybe coming out saying, hey, you've introduced some new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ideas to explore. I really like that a lot. I think that would be an ideal of mine, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, community and neighbor are maybe interchangeable, but I do feel like for us, if people hear the podcast, and I think all of us sort of share this vision too, is like if they listened to the podcast and said, I didn't know this was how my neighbors were experiencing the world. That's what I'd love for them to love for them. And you can find that through books or through hearing stories. We use books as like books are sort of just the anchor for that whole conversation about what is our neighborhood like? What are our neighbors like? How are they experiencing these things? So, well, Allison,
that note.
Ian,
Tim. Thank you so much for this conversation.
We're not sure who's interviewing who here.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like a free-for-all questioning and getting to know each other. And it's been such a pleasure to spend the afternoon with you both.
Likewise. We've been...
Thanks for having us on your podcast.
Yes. Thank you for taking over Literary Atlanta. For all of you who listened because of me, tough. It's over.
No, this has been something we've been really excited about, just following along with your podcast, Twitter, just kind of keeping up with you, and just finally that moment where we're getting to meet. And I don't know, it's been...
I know, and you have I know at least one exciting guest that I can't wait to hear on What Are You Reading coming up. So definitely stay tuned, everybody.
All of us would like to extend a hearty thanks to Atlanta Vintage Books. They've created such a cool space for having these kind of conversations, for gathering over books with other people who love books. So stop by Atlanta Vintage Books. If you're a listener of the What Are You Reading podcast or the Literary Atlanta podcast, and you come in and say, I came in because I heard this podcast, I heard Literary Atlanta, or I heard What Are You Reading, they'll give you a little 10% discount on your final checkout.
We have to say the new tagline, right? Which is, come for the cats, stay for the books. So,
that's right.
Because they do have some sweet kitties here.
And they'll pop up at the most random moments too. That's awesome.
It's very cat-like.
Yeah. But also, we would love to hear from you if you want to follow us. Actually, I would say first, if you want to go to, whatayoureadingpodcast.com, and there it's kind of our hub where you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and just kind of follow along and communicate with us. That's the one thing I'm trying to be better at doing more of, but just getting that kind of listener interaction. We love hearing from you and what you're reading, what's on your mind at the moment. And also, of course, iTunes. We would love to have you rate us there, review us. It always means a lot. Yeah. Allison, what about you? How can people find Literary Atlanta? How can they get in touch with you?
Go to literaryatlanta.com, and then all of the places that you mentioned, kind of the podcast hubs of the world, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, so TuneIn, Radio. So that's awesome. We're all there at Literary Atlanta.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you. This was fun.
Man. And as always, we'll wrap it up with a book quote. This is from Hannah Arendt. Storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. Thanks for listening.
And thank you again to Ian North and Tim Rhodes for inviting me to be a part of their What Are You Reading podcast, and for being a part of Literary Atlanta. There are so many events that I could tell you about that are happening this first week in February. It would blow your mind. So please visit the website. There you will find events at the Margaret Mitchell House for Christina McMorris. Her book, Sold on a Monday, coming to the Margaret Mitchell House on February 5th. Tara Conklin, author of The Last Romantics, will be at Margaret Mitchell House on February 7th. Terry Jones is celebrating the paperback release of her book, An American Marriage, first on February 5th at the First Baptist Church in Decatur, then on February 7th at the Foundry in Athens. That's going to be hosted by Avid Bookshop. Avid is also hosting an event on February 5th with Sonia Kamal, author of Unmarriageable. That's at the Prince Avenue location of Avid Bookshop. And on February 7th at Agnes Scott College, Isabel Wilkerson will be talking about the Great Migration and Immigration. She, of course, is the author of the wonderful book, The Warmth of Other Suns. And to wrap up an already blockbuster week, on Friday, February 8th, Man Booker Prize winning author Marlon James is going to be at the Carter Center. He has a new book out, which is the first in a trilogy, and it's being billed as the African Game of Thrones. This book is called Red Leopard, Black Wolf. Marlon James will be in conversation with Atlanta author Nick Stone. You'll remember her from episode 20 of the Literary Atlanta podcast when she was talking about her book, Dear Martin. So Marlon James in conversation with Nick Stone, that's happening Friday, February 8th. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website. That's literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast. Apple Podcast, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.